Shabbat Shalom, everyone. This Shabbat, I'm going to tell you the story of Joseph who loved Shabbat. Even if you've already heard it, stick around. As my father says, a great story is like Shabbat. It's best when it comes around often. Once upon a time, there was a very poor man named Joseph. Joseph loved Shabbat so much that everyone in the town called him, you guessed it, Joseph-Who-Loves-Shabbat. Joseph-Who-Loves-Shabbat worked for a very rich merchant who had lots of land and lots of possessions and wasn't a very fair boss. Joseph worked from very early in the morning until very late at night, and still he didn't even get paid enough to feed his family. His family lived in poverty, wearing the simplest clothes, eating the simplest meals, until Shabbat. On Shabbat, Joseph, who loved Shabbat, dressed in his finest clothes. He fed his family the finest of meals, and they lived just like kings every Shabbat. One night, the rich merchant had a dream, and in the dream, he heard a voice telling him that Joseph was going to acquire all of his wealth. From Joseph your wealth came, and to Joseph it will return. The old man woke with a start. The merchant was terrified that he would lose all of his wealth. He immediately grabbed all of his belongings and went straight to town and sold them for one thing, a pearl. And he thought, this pearl will never leave my sight. It will never, ever, ever leave me, and then Joseph will never get my wealth. So he put the pearl in his hat and wore the hat on his head every day when he was waking or when he was sleeping. One day, the merchant was walking along a bridge, and all of a sudden a breeze came by and blew the turban right off his head, and with it, his precious pearl. Right into the water, he watched his pearl fall, and yelling for help after nobody came, he jumped right into the water to rescue the pearl. Well, he did find the turban, but he never did come across the pearl. Almost drowning, he had to give up his search. What happened to the pearl, you ask? Well, a fish swallowed the pearl, a very large and very hungry fish, who also unfortunately swallowed the wrong worm and was picked up by a fisherman. This fisherman took the fish to the marketplace in hopes of selling it for Shabbat that very evening. But it was late in the day, many had already done their shopping, and it was a very big and pricey fish. The fisherman didn't know what he was going to do until he thought of Joseph-Who-Loves-Shabbat. He said, surely Joseph will buy this fish from me. Surely Joseph-Who-Loves-Shabbat would not turn down such a wonderful Shabbat meal. And he was right. Sure enough, Joseph bought the fish from him, cooked his family a lovely fish dinner for Shabbat, and as his youngest son was biting into his fish, came across a beautiful pearl. Joseph took the pearl and could not believe his luck. What an amazing thing to come out of this beautiful Shabbat meal. Well, after Shabbat, Joseph took that pearl to the king, and the king bought it to put right on his crown next to the most precious of jewels. And with the money from the pearl, Joseph was far more wealthy than the merchant could ever be again. Joseph used his newfound wealth to help everyone in the village have a fabulous Shabbat, so that Joseph was not the only one who loved Shabbat anymore. And one day, as Joseph was celebrating Shabbat with his family and his friends, one of the elders of the community came up to him and said, Joseph, the one who lends to Shabbat, Shabbat will repay. So tonight, let us all lend to Shabbat, together with our families and our communities. And let us remember that though we may not be paid in pearls, Shabbat will always give us light and the prosperity of love. Shabbat Shalom.